Hi, everybody. Robeson back again, kind of continuing with our series, How the Modern World Works, as we, see the formation of, British piracy, and, the first touch points on in North America and in the Caribbean, places like Barbados, places like Bermuda, places like Virginia. Um, what we see is the rise of the first multinational corporations. They were known at the time as joint stock corporations, but basically what they are is they have investors who decide to invest in colonizing a piece of land, and they have a expect return on that. So you might have a venture where you need to colonize, let's say Jamestown, which was the Virginia company. You would need to have some military minded folks. You would have to have some agricultural workers. You're going to have some indentured workers. You might even need to have, if you don't have enough labor, you might have to go and get slaves as well. And you might need certain objectives that you're trying to get done in a certain period of time so that the investors can get their return on investment. So that could be that if you go to Virginia, that we institute the implementation of or the cultivation of tobacco. But that is a crop that may take some time to bear fruit. But we might also use that territory to conduct piratical or pirate type activities where we're able to rob and plunder and do things of that nature. So these early colonies have multiple purposes, and they're trying to kind of gain a foothold and have access to the waters off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean and use the fisheries and sell those things. Also to be involved in the trade of illicit items. It could be drugs, it could be silks, it could be spices, all of the other types of things. So this is where we see these joint stock corporations as they spread out. This is where we see the creation of what is called the triangular trade, and the triangular trade is basically thinking of the United Kingdom or England as the home base, and they have a domestic industry, they have domestic population that needs to be secure, and so they have now created these corporations, particularly the British East India Company, which is the first multinational corporation. They've gone out now into the Indian Ocean and have taken over parts of India, what we call India today, and other territories. They have discovered tea and sugar and spices and silks that they now have accumulated and now are looking to offload and sell. And so they may need to bring those items back to England, but at the scale that they are acquiring these objects, the small customer base of England, let's say, the elites of England, is not enough for this to be a continuing business model. So this is where we see the birth and rise of capitalism, because if I'm, have this monopoly on sugar production and tea, then I need customers. And if I don't have people that are making money, I don't have people who can buy goods, right? And I'm getting so many things coming from these territories where I'm out, right? And I can't all send it back to the domestic market because that may undermine the businesses of the local business community. So they also need to look at where are these other areas where Europeans have located. So the American colonies, the British colonies in the Caribbean, and other European dominated colonies in the Americas become that third leg from where goods are being grabbed, and then they're looked to be sold both in England or in Europe, but also in these colonial entities where everyone is looking for acquiring the comforts of their home country, which was Europe. So the British East India Company becomes the dominant power, in getting involved in all of these trades. The Dutch East India Company is its principal rival, and they do pretty much the same things. They have kind of areas where they overlap, and that causes a lot of friction between those two companies, right? And the way to think of them when we say companies is that they're really more like what you would say MI6 would be, or a CIA would be, which is that they have an economic arm, they have a military arm, they have an intelligence arm, and they have a political arm. And they kind of go into each situation where they're looking to, get a foothold, and they will play whatever levers that they need to get what they're trying to get accomplished done. And so what makes these kind of corporations is really what the British Empire is. And the reason for that is they are going out and making money, and they're going out and making profits by doing what they're doing. And from time to time, they need support from the British Crown. And in most cases, that was principally in the form of the Royal Navy, which would be a backing system to any problems that they might run into as they're trying to dominate the spice trade, or dominate the silk trade, or the sugar trade, or things of that nature. So, and that also might mean that we need, British troops to come in certain areas where these corporations are involved. So, so we've talked about the British East India Company, the Dutch East India Company. So they're really more focused in Asia and in the Indian Ocean, so the subcontinent. And then the the Dutch and the British come up with two other companies that are more focused on North America. So the Royal African Company is given a monopoly by the British Crown to procure slaves for the New World. So for the Americas, for the Caribbean, and for North America, or the British American colonies. And the Dutch West India Company does exactly the same thing. So these folks are making money bringing slaves over, which was very, slave labor was in high demand throughout the Americas up until, probably the early 1800s. So those are kind of these big kind of multinational businesses and corporations that are not focused on any particular local entity. So they're very expansive in scope. They have a lot of resources, and they get what they want. And then there's kind of the smaller localized, charter companies or joint stock corporations. And the examples of those would be the Virginia Company, which is the Jamestown colony, and the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company, which is what we know as Plymouth Rock, right? So both they're slightly different. Virginia Company was more of a private investor led entity, and their goal was to build a foothold there in Virginia, and access to the shipping lanes. I mean, access to the fisheries off the coast, access to probably building crops that could be out for service or for sale, and then developing a society that's sustainable enough to buy and trade goods. And so we see Virginia develop over and that was in 1609. So we see over the 1600s, Virginia, kind of expanding at an exponential rate, population wise, with a combination of indentured Irish servants, free blacks that had, the first blacks that were in Virginia were not slaves. Significant size of free Africans or free blacks in Virginia in the 1600s. And then over time, as indentured labor became difficult to acquire, the colony needed to get slaves from Africa to come into that territory to help grow the colony. So what we see leading up to 1670s is that the indentured Irish and the free blacks live very closely together and intermingle and have children together. They socialize together. They do a lot of things, and they are kind of like mind because they're in a similar situation economically, right? And then we see the indentured Irish that have fulfilled their indenture and now are looking for land. And so the problem with Virginia at this time is that the British are cultivating their relationships with the Native Americans. and they are, courting the Powhatan tribe, which is the first tribe that they see in Virginia, and they would bring the elites of that tribe over to England for indoctrination in Christianity. And you could easily say that they favored those Native American tribes over their own colonists in Jamestown. So the indentured Irish, who, if you know history, the British and the Irish have a very contentious relationship. And it's important to, I don't think you can understand American history without understanding how much hatred and, enmity there is between the Irish and the British, because that carries over into the Americas and how the Irish are treated, here in America, and how other ethnic groups are pitted against them by the British for the sake of divide and rule, which we talked about, or divide and conquer. So what we start to see is that these free blacks, these indentured Irish who have gained their independence after their 7-year indenture, they're looking for land, and the only places where land can be found are on the outskirts of the colonial territory, which puts them into conflict with Native Americans. So obviously the raids and the massacres that might happen at times, because these folks are pushing themselves out on the frontier to get themselves land, and they start to complain to the governor that they don't feel like they're being supported, and they were correct, because the governor is more focused on support, the relationship he has with the Powhatan tribe, and um, and other local Indian tribes. And so they're saying, yeah, we don't want you to expand outward. We want you to stay in this area by the coast because you're easier to manage on the coast. The British are a naval power, not a land power like you would see with a Russia or France or one of these continental powers. So they want you close to the coast, and so having relationships with Native American tribes serves many purposes, but one is to keep the expansion inward or in country to a limit, which makes the easier for the British to handle and control the colonies. So the Irish and others who are trying to get land are frustrated with their own government, and this is where we see the first political rebellions against British rule in British America, and that's in the 1670s. And so that the first one is known as Bacon's Rebellion, and it was a mixture of free blacks, indentured Irish, um, African slaves, and some elites that had a more nationalistic approach or belief against the British government. So the idea that 1776 is the beginning of frustration with frustration with the British, or that the aftermath of the French and Indian War in the 1750s is kind of the first rumblings or grumblings of being dissatisfied with how the British are running the administrating the colonies, American colonies, is not true. It's almost from the beginning, because again, the British at this point did not have the ability to control and administer these territories the way, with a heavy hand, the way that they would learn to over the next 100 years. So, Jamestown colony is pretty much under loose control, and they're kind of growing their own set of independent ideas. And you can say the same thing in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So, in fact, as we kind of transition to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that one is a little different because the British, the United Kingdom had a problem with the Puritans, and they were happy to see them leave because they were causing trouble there, about religion, and the United Kingdom at that time had just gone through many decades of religious warfare, internecine religious warfare between the Catholics and Protestants, and now the Puritans are criticizing Protestantism as well. So they were happy to see them go, but it is a corporation that was supported by the British Crown. But again, we see instantly they start to develop its own personality. This one is kind of a theocracy based society, and uh, by the late 1600s, in the 1680s or so, the British Crown is unhappy with their level of autonomy and seeming independence, and so they pull back this original charter that they made and decided to put a more strict administration over the Massachusetts Bay Colony at this time. So what you can see here is that the formation of these states, Virginia, Massachusetts, and then you see Georgia and other states start to come online, is that the people have their own agenda about what they want for themselves, but there's a corporate interest that is behind the politics of the administration of those territories. So the governor of Virginia, the governor of Massachusetts, there is an economic entity, a corporate entity that is seeking return of investment, and that is kind of the formulation of what America becomes. And these states become their own, powers within themselves, and then eventually the country becomes the United States. But that corporate interest has been entrenched from the very beginning. And so when we're taught American history, we're not taught about the corporate interest that was uh, at the essence of formulating these colonies that became states that became a country. I hope this helps. I hope this is interesting. Please put notes in the comments in the commentary for me if you have anything for me. And I'm enjoying doing this, and I'm going to continue to go forward until we get to the modern day, and hopefully there's a coherence that we can see where it puts everything together. What I've learned about history is that you cannot exclude the economic imperatives of of the day from history. Otherwise, we're just getting puzzle pieces that never fit. Have a good day.